All right, today we're going to be looking at something a little different, or very different. In fact, when I first saw the promotional shots for this watch from Yema, it was, very surprising. Not exactly at all what I was expecting, but when the box came in the mail and I opened it up, I really just couldn't help but smile when I took a look at the watch. It's just a really fun, cool retro timepiece. Today we're going to take a look at the new Yema LED, and I think this is actually the first review on YouTube for it, so that's cool that I get to introduce it to you guys. Let's take a look. Hey everybody, welcome back to Just the Watch, the budget watch collecting channel. My name's Dave, and I like to talk about everything related to watch collecting on a budget. The watch that I'm reviewing today is a piece from Yema. Yema is a French watch manufacturer, probably one of the most famous French watch manufacturers. They've been having a bit of a resurgence lately. Their dive watches in particular are very popular. They have the Superman, and I've reviewed the Navy Graph here on the channel. So a lot of very classic designs coming out of them. So I was really surprised to see an LED watch coming from Yema. And I had no idea that this was a part of their history and heritage. I only thought of them as a dive watch company or as a military watch company, or they're racing chronographs, these more classic looking pieces. So this really kind of opened my eyes to the sort of breadth of Yema's past catalog, because this is a reissue. This is a watch that is modeled after one of their watches from the 1970s. This is an LED quartz watch. And this is from a very interesting time in watch history. This was during the quartz crisis, when quartz watches were first pioneered and introduced. And when quartz watches first came out, they really revolutionized the watch world for two reasons. One, they were very cheap to produce. They became cheaper to produce than mechanical timepieces, and they were far more accurate. So quartz timepieces really brought watches into the mainstream and made it possible for everybody to have a watch. Now, the initial quartz watches were regular wrist watches. They had minutes hands and second hands. They were analog watches. The next kind of revolution in quartz timepieces came in the 1970s, when the first digital watches were produced. And I believe it was Hamilton that created the first quartz timepiece with a digital readout, which was a Hamilton Pulsar. And this watch is kind of similar to that one in a lot of ways. Now, you guys are familiar with digital watches now. They are still some of the most popular watches out there. Casio really dominates. But mostly what you see with digital watches now, they have LCD displays, so liquid crystal displays. And that's a display that takes very little power and can be seen in daylight without needing a backlight. Now, the LED technology is a little bit older, and so that was what was originally available to people when they were making the first digital watches. LED stands for light emitting diode, so this is something that lights up, and it takes power to power the watch and to light it up. So because of that, there were battery power constraints, and in order to make an LED watch, you couldn't just have it on all the time, or it would just drain the battery too fast. So the original ones had this functionality where they would be dark until you pushed a button. And that's exactly what this watch is. And this was just incredibly revolutionary at the time. I mean, we totally take this for granted now, but the idea of a digital watch was just amazing. It was something that is easier to tell the time. I mean, if you look at a digital display versus an analog display, you can read the digital display much faster. I mean, look at it. Like an analog display, it'll take you a couple seconds to read. Digital display, you just instantly see the time. And so the idea that you could have that on your wrist in the 1970s was just mind-blowing. On top of that, the LED display, where it lights up, was also a revolutionary thing. It meant that you could read the time in the dark perfectly easily. You had an active light on your wrist, and so it was very easy to tell the time, night or day. Another thing that was just fascinating to people in the 1970s was the fact that these digital watches required basically a little computer inside to record and keep track of the time. An analog quartz watch, it has little motors and gears in it still, and the time is displayed by the hands that just progress. But if you think about it, a digital watch actually needs some kind of computer components inside it to keep track of the time and to display that on the display. Again, this was just completely revolutionary for the 1970s. So this idea that you could have a digital readout, the idea that you could have a watch that had a computer inside of it, the idea that it lit up, all of these things were just really premium features when these first were released. Now, I don't know exactly what the Yema price range was when this was originally released in the 1970s. I know other comparable models were released around $1,500, which is now somewhere around $7,500. So these LED watches, when they were first released, they were priced at the same level as luxury watches today. And I bring all this up because I think this history is a very important part of this watch. This watch is now featuring all of this technology that I talked about is now completely commonplace and even obsolete. I mean, an LED display where you have to push the button to read the time is a drawback now. That's why LCD displays took over. So people who are going to be interested in this watch are going to be interested primarily for the style and the nostalgia, not for the high technology that they offer, because this is a piece of history. This is, very similar to the watches that were released back in the 1970s. But this one has been updated and refreshed a bit. It's been refined, and I think the result is really cool. Again, the design and the style of this watch is really appealing in my opinion, and it's something that I've just really enjoyed playing around with. Also, big thanks to Yema for providing this watch. They did give it to me for free for review purposes, so I do get to keep it. So please keep that in mind as you listen to the rest of the review of this product. However, other than providing the watch, Yema had no input into the content of this review, and I will be giving my complete and honest opinion of the watch. Anyways, enough talking about it. Let's jump in and take a closer look. Okay, so here is the Yema LED digital watch. As noted before, you have a button here to light up the time. It lights up for a little bit over a second, and you get a nice easy read on the LED display. And when it's off, it has, again, this kind of really cool sci-fi look. Reminds me a lot of Battlestar Galactica. Kind of looks like a robot with a red face going over it. And one of the updates that they've done is to the case. There's a lot of great details on here, alternating brushing and polishing. So the top of it is a brushed surface, but then you get these faceted edges that are polished, going over to a high polish on the side. And just a really cool profile with that red mineral crystal going across the entire face of the watch. Dimensions on the watch, you're getting 37.5 millimeters across, 42.5 millimeters lug to lug, 20 millimeter lug widths, which is great because Yema usually gives 19. So this one you actually can change it out to a bunch of different straps, and we'll show you what it looks like on a couple of others in a minute here. And the height is only 10 millimeters thick. So nice and slim. This is a red mineral crystal going across the face of the watch, and this watch features 100 meters of water resistance, which is great. That was one thing I was really surprised to see. I had expected this to be much lower water resistance for what it is, kind of this retro nostalgic piece. But they equipped it with a full 100 meters, so you should have no problem getting this thing wet. Functions on the watch are very basic. Press the button once to show the time. Press it a second time while it's lit to show the date. Third time to show the seconds. To set the time, you light it up first and then hold down this button. This will enter you into the time setting mode, and you can scroll through the various time and date functions. Very basic. You can display it in 12 or 24 hours. I think this does have a perpetual calendar built into it, which is nice. You saw me enter the year in there. So I assume it keeps track of leap years and that sort of thing. So this should very much be a set it and forget it kind of watch, just like most digital watches are. Inside the movement that they have, they say that this is a proprietary digital movement that Yema has produced. So I don't know any information about that, but it being a digital quartz movement, I assume it's very accurate and robust. Now the bracelet is also a very big part of this watch, and it's a very fitting bracelet. I really like the way this looks. However, it is a folded link bracelet. So you can see these are not solid links. And I'm not 100% sure why they did that. I know that these folded link bracelets were very heavily used back in the 70s when this watch, the original version of this watch was released. So it could largely be for a point of historical accuracy. I will say that, again, the bracelet looks fantastic. It's got very nice brushed finish on it that really matches the character of the watch. And it's pretty comfortable as far as folded link bracelets go. There's a very minimal amount of arm hair pulling on it. So this is a much higher quality folded link bracelet than you would get from like a Seiko 5. A lot of times I don't, I just can't wear these bracelets, but this one I haven't really had much of an issue with. It's comfortable enough on the wrist. So where it attaches to the watch, you get a lot of articulation there, which is cool. But the bracelet itself only bends about this much. So if you have a really tiny wrist, you might start getting some awkward fitting on it. But for me, I didn't have any problem. The clasp has a hook on it that hooks onto the bar there. And then a locking mechanism there to lock it in place. Feels very secure there. And nice Yema branded clasp as well. So again, similar in function to what you would see on a lot of Casio digital watches that have kind of this style band, but I think at a higher quality of manufacturer, even though it is, again, still folded link. Here it is on my 7.5-inch wrist, and you'll see it wears actually fairly large for a 37.5 millimeter. I didn't feel like this was a small watch at all. In fact, I was pretty surprised when I actually got my calipers out to measure it and to see, how big it was. So it has a lot of wrist presence, but it's still very thin, very comfortable on the wrist, conforms very well. It's very flat. There's not a lot of curvature to it, but because it is such a small watch, I think that's not a problem at all. Let me light this up a couple times so you guys can see it. So again, very, very easy to read. Light pops up. Even when I got it, the studio light shined directly on it, it's still bright enough that you can read. But in direct sunlight, that does get a bit difficult. Aesthetically, this watch is just really cool. In fact, when I first got it out, again, I was just smiling really big when I saw it. I think it's a very sleek looking watch. It actually looks, I think, cool. It doesn't look cheesy to me, and I think it very easily could have. It's almost a bit understated for something as kind of retro as this is. In fact, oftentimes when I get a watch in, the first thing I do is show it to my wife, and 9 times out of 10, she hates it. She hates anything that's slightly out of the ordinary. She likes very simple, classic watches only, so I completely expected to get a fun reaction out of her when I showed her this. And she looked at it, and she paused, and she was like, I actually kind of like it. And so that was really surprising. And I think that kind of speaks a lot for Yema and their design team, for how they did in getting this watch kind of, toned down, where it is something that is so far out there and so unusual, and yet it looks kind of cool. It doesn't look like a toy. It looks very well made, very nice. And I think the finishing that they've done on the case and the brushing and the polishing really helps with that. I think that red mineral crystal going across the front, just a really great look. I think it'll make a great conversation starter, especially when someone sees you reach up and hit the time like that. Now, obviously, this watch is not for everyone. A lot of people are going to take a quick pass on it. But for those who are interested in this kind of style and look, I think it's a really fun, cool offering. All right, let's do a couple of strap options. First off, probably the most straightforward one. If the folded link bracelet is something you really don't like and you can't stand any arm hair pulling at all, this looks great on a Milanese strap as well. I think it preserves a lot of the look and feel of the original strap, but gives you something that's maybe a little bit more comfortable. So I think that's a fun alternative look. But what if you really wanted to sort of pull a different look on this? Let's try something a little bit more radical. Okay, now here is a kind of distressed vintage Italian leather strap from Vario, and this I think really leans into the 70s nostalgia. You really start to play this up as more of trying to treat it like it is a luxury timepiece. Because again, that's more what these would have been marketed as in the original time. And so this is kind of a cool, fun retro look to put it on a leather strap like this. All right, next, what if you wanted to do something a little bit more rugged and adventurous? Well, I think you can put a NATO on this as well. This is one of Vario's Twill NATOs. And I think this is kind of a fun look to it. Again, 100 meters of water resistance. One of the main selling points of these watches originally was that there are no moving parts inside, so they're more shock resistant and rugged than traditional timepieces. And yeah, I'm kind of surprised at the versatility that this thing has with the different strap options you can do. You kind of get a lot of fun looks out of it. Now these watches are available in either a silver or gold color. The silver one that I have in for review retails for I think around $259 on Yema's website, which might seem a little expensive for a digital watch with this level of features. But again, you're getting this for the history and the nostalgia and the style more than the actual function of the watch. And the main competitors to this, as near as I can tell, is I think Hamilton has a reissue of the original Pulsar watch, and Bulova has a reissue of their Computron. The Hamilton is, I believe, close to $1,000 or more. I think the Bulova is pretty closely in line with this one. So compared to other LED watches on the market that bring you this kind of retro historic feel, this watch is priced pretty competitively. So obviously this watch is not going to be for everybody. It's going to be primarily for people who are really drawn to this style and this time period and the history of watchmaking, and particularly Yema's part in that. Positives about this watch, again, I love the style. This is one of my favorite looking LED watches out there. I like the way it looks, better than the Bulova, maybe even I think better than the Hamilton. It's just got this really awesome kind of sci-fi vibe to it that I think it doesn't look cheesy. Like the other ones look too much like they're taken right out of the 70s. This one has a little bit more polish in my opinion. They've kind of refined the design a little bit and updated it, and I think it just looks really cool. It retains that 70s nostalgic feel, but it just looks great. It looks like kind of like a sci-fi prop or something, like something you would see in a science fiction film. Also, 100 meters of water resistance. I was really surprised by that. So this is actually a pretty capable watch in that regard. It's not something that you have to, really baby. Full stainless steel case is another premium thing that you don't see on a lot of digital watches. And usually if you do see a digital watch with a stainless steel case, it starts to jump up in price very quickly. On the negative sides, that folded link bracelet was a little bit of a disappointment. I understand that this is a period accurate bracelet, and I think it fits the character of the watch well. Just the flat links that it has look great, and I don't even know if there's a way to do this kind of bracelet in a solid link. You could probably get something that carries a similar look to it, but it might require a folded link. And the folded link bracelet on this is very good for a folded link bracelet. There's only a little bit of arm hair pulling. It's not that noticeable, but you still get some of that. Other minor annoyances that I've kind of already touched on is one, you do have to push the button to tell the time, so this watch requires 2 hands to operate. So it's really fun and cool to push the button and see the time light up. It's also kind of a pain sometimes when you've got your hands full. Also, in really bright sunlight, like direct sunlight, the watch is a little bit difficult to read. You might have to shade it a little bit. But for the most part, in most lighting conditions, I didn't have a problem at all. All right, guys, that wraps it up for today. Drop a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about this watch from Yema. Let me know what you think about LED watches in particular, if you have any experience with maybe some of the Hamilton or Bulova editions, and if this is something that appeals to you or if it's just kind of not your thing. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.